So far in the 2022 WRX range, we've covered the WRX GT Sportwagon with a CVT transmission, the WRX RS sedan with a 6-speed manual transmission, and now we have the WRX TS Sportwagon with a CVT, which is the top spec Sportwagon. The reason why we have this TS here is that the TS in both the sedan and the Sportwagon are the only variants of the 6 ones offered in Australia to have adaptive dampers as standard or to have adaptive dampers at all, because they aren't offered on any of the other models. And as we've discovered with the GT Sportwagon, which is quite supple, bordering soft, and then with the RS manual sedan, which is quite firm, bordering hard, do these adaptive dampers somehow find a great middle ground? Which is why we're testing the car. Now, it's probably no secret, you should know this by now, I'd imagine, if you've been watching our channel, that the WRX Sportwagon is a Levorg in all markets other than Australia and New Zealand. It's a WRX GT in New Zealand, and here it's just the Sportwagon, but it is the Levorg. So it does have slightly different body styling. It has the same underpinnings, but it has a different suspension tune, even though the hierarchy in both the sedan and the wagon go fixed damper, adaptive dampers. There's still different tunes for each lineup, even though their drivetrains are the same, because Australia's version of the WRX Sportwagon has the 2.4 litre, 202 kilowatt flat 4 turbo that the sedan has in other markets, which is great. We don't want the Japanese engine, it's too small, but it will be offered there at some point. Now, this TS here has a couple of extras over the GT that we've already tested below it. The difference is only $2,500 in price, but it does bring a premium front bumper bar. It has different design alloy wheels, those machine face swirly things. It has different pipes at the back. It has a sunroof, ultra suede trim, and a bunch of STI things inside the cabin to just make it a little bit more special. And I suppose that's why we're here to look at this thing. Is it actually special enough to justify what seems to be a fairly modest price premium? Now, the reason why you would pay a $1,000 premium over the WRX sedan for the Sportwagon is right here, and that's because it has all of this, a wagon body with greater luggage space. The TS, which is the model we're testing here, is identifiable by this TS badge with a little sort of hot pink S on it, and it does have different pipes to the GT, these ones being more round and a little bit cooler looking. It also has a lot less cladding than the WRX sedan around the back here. So this look actually is relatively classy, even though it still retains Subaru's crab claw tail lights. Here they just seem to blend in better with the look of the car. And when you go in here, if you remember the WRX sedan RS that we drove, the boot was very sparsely trimmed with just a mat on the floor, nothing else in there, nothing to grab a hold of to shut the boot, and no way to drop the rear seats. Whereas here we've got an electric tailgate, we've got really nice carpet trimming in the floor, and we've got 2 switches on the side here that you just pull and the backrest drop dead flat all the way through to the front. Like 492 litres underneath this luggage cover too, whereas the sedan's only 411 to 414. So if practicality matters, this is already romped at home. What the TS Sportwagon brings over the GT Sportwagon below it that we've already tested is quite a lot, I think, for $2,500. It's really quite tangible, the lift in luxury, although it is still quite similar to the RS manual sedan that we drove a few weeks ago. That's the mid-spec in the sedans. It does get these beautiful perforated ultra suede seat trim with STI logos on here. We've also got an STI on the steering wheel here with different stitching and leather and a flat bottom, STI in the instrument pack, a driver monitoring system, and nicely like felt lined door pockets instead of just plain plastic. Little things like that really do lift the interior of it. It otherwise is the same as in the sedan. So the same sitting position, the same great view ahead, all of that packaging goodness is there, but the TS Sportwagon doesn't get the sedan's 10-speaker Harman Kardon stereo, which is in the top 2 sedan versions, because it doesn't have a rear pulsar shelf and it can't house the subwoofer. So we drop from 10 speakers to 6, and instead of just having the simple treble and bass stuff that's in the Harman Kardon version, we get what the BRZ has, which is like a virtual stage enhancer, bass enhancer, voice something or other, all of these sort of digital layers, and there's 4 of them that kind of are there to try and make up for the fact that the stereo isn't really that natural and sadly isn't a match for what the Harman Kardon one would be. for $1,000 less in the sedan than this. In the back seat, the TS doesn't bring much different over the GT Sportwagon below it. It's mainly about the ultra suede trim, which does hold you in position better in corners and looks a lot better than the plain old leather. It also has the flock line door pockets, like we mentioned in the front, which add a little bit of an extra pizzazz. I suppose what it's about in here though is that it's more practical than the sedan. The backrest has 5-position recline. We have a ski port in the middle here, which is really useful for using its all-wheel drive wagon chic when going to the snow. We've still got pretty good headroom, even though I've got a sunroof. In fact, really good headroom. There's heaps of room kind of everywhere. It's just a natural, nice place to be. Windows wind all the way down, auto up-down windows, 2 USB ports, outboard seat heating, plus we have the benefit of superior suspension control because we have the adaptive dampers. So if you're carrying a lot of people on a load, again, I think the TS justifies its price. The combined fuel consumption figure for the Subaru WRX TS Sportwagon is 8.5 litres per 100 kilometres with a CVT transmission. However, we've averaged 12.2 litres per 100 kilometres, drinking 95 octane premium unleaded. That compares to the 13.4 that we averaged in the 6-speed manual in an RS sedan a couple of weeks ago. So, meaning doesn't matter what transmission you have, the 2.4 turbo in the new WRX can be thirsty if you're not doing highway running, because neither of those numbers involve any highway motoring. The warranty for Subaru in Australia is 5 years or unlimited kilometres, whereas the recommended servicing for this vehicle is every 12 months or 15,000 Ks, with the cap price 5-year, 75,000 kilometre amount being $2,366. Now what I'm doing here is essentially comparing the WRX TS Sportwagon with adaptive dampers against the WRX GT Sportwagon that we filmed recently without the adaptive dampers, as well as the WRX RS manual sedan that we've also driven without adaptive dampers. And I've driven a TS sedan with adaptive dampers, but only in town. So if you're already confused, it's not a surprise because there's 6 models in the WRX lineup and a lot of them are quite different. So what we have here is the wagon setup, which means essentially a Levorg with the narrower tyres. We only have Yokohama Blue Earth tyres, 225 wide here compared to the 245 wide on the WRX with Dunlop SP Sport Max, and you can definitely tell a difference with that between the two. The sedan, the RS manual that we drove, felt like it was on rails. Absolutely no understeer, front end point like you wouldn't believe in a normal WRX. It felt STI-ish in its level of dynamism, whereas this TS, even with the adaptive dampers and all the drive modes that it offers on the Yokohama tyres with the slightly narrower track and a different suspension tune all around anyway, just doesn't have that bite at the front. It does wash a little bit wide, it doesn't turn in as quickly, and it does not feel like it's on rails at all. It doesn't feel like it's not on rails, but it's all about how you drive it, how you position it, where the all-drive system is, if you have it in all-drive sport, all that sort of stuff. Now, comparing the fixed rate WRX GT wagon against this TS, I think that the standard car with the fixed dampers sits somewhere between comfort and normal in the settings on this TS, and it has quite a few. I've brought up the screen here in the middle that you can leave up all the time that has the whole drive mode select system. So we're going comfort, normal, sport, sport plus and individual, and it all stays there and it shows you in little widgets what the parameters are for each one and ghosts out the ones that you don't have selected. So it's pretty obvious. You can do it through the mode on the wheel, but then it only comes up temporarily, whereas here you can have it up all the time. So it's far more sophisticated and offers a lot more choice than just the basic WRX GT that, as we've already said, only costs $2,500 less than this. And I can tell you now already that the extra money for this is already well spent. The standard wagon on the roads we test here bottomed out a couple of times, and while it felt supple, it still felt a little bit lacking in body control. Whereas I drove this TS Sportwagon in comfort, which is the lowest setting of all of the dynamic settings, pretty much as hard as I could through all these same bumpy corners. It did not bottom out. It felt a little bit better controlled. It doesn't have body control issues. It actually feels quite good. And the step up between all these modes, between comfort, normal, sport and sport plus, is nowhere near as dramatic as it is in, say, some German cars. The Sport Plus is still completely drivable on a country Australian road, and comfort is actually still quite enjoyable. It's all about the nuances between steering weighting, the amount of all drive it sends to the back wheels, the positioning of the throttle, like some of them are more perky than others. And when you go through the screens here, as you can see on screen what they sit in, the difference between normal and sport is simply that it changes the power unit to sport rather than intelligent. So it's about throttle response. And it switches eyesight from standard to dynamic to have less intrusion of all those safety systems. Sport Plus amps up everything. So power unit in Sport Sharp, steering in Sport, suspension in Sport, all-wheel drive Sport, and then individual is whatever you want to make it. So the fact that you have all those options there are great. But what the Sportwagon doesn't have that the sedan has is just that purchase and that poise. It does, like I said, wash wide a bit in the front end. It doesn't have the same steering point, and because these WRXs don't really have that much true feel in the first place, it isn't as dynamic as it could be. The ride around town in normal mode, and especially in comfort, is really great compared to the abrupt vertical movement of that RS sedan that we drove recently, the manual. It is chalk and cheese. As soon as you get in the TS with adaptive dampers, even in normal and not in comfort, it's transformed as a sophisticated performance vehicle. It's just that it isn't available with a manual transmission. But I'm going to say that the CVT in these cars, which is now the Subaru Performance Transmission, is so well calibrated that I think it does a huge step towards making up for the fact that this is not a torque converter automatic. That said, in the TS, it is a little bit more complex going from lower settings in the CVT to upper settings, because when you're hitting the mode here, you're also changing all the stuff there, and you can do that stuff on screen as well as on the button on the wheel, which is like in the normal GT. But when you're in Sport Sharp mode, this CVT does a terrific impression of rev matching on downshifts, choosing the right gear, shifting really quite decisively rather than slurring like inserted ratios and other CVTs, and will dispel many of the concerns of people about the fact that this TS Sportwagon is only available as a CVT, as is the sedan. I think if you really are after a proper WRX performance model with the adaptive dampers, you need to buy the sedan. It's a better driver's car. And if you're really after a wagon that is of the same pricing ballpark, pretty much the exact same drive-away price as this TS Sportwagon, is a Skoda Octavia RS wagon. And the Skoda is a bigger car, moves around a lot more, is a little bit more involving, but doesn't have all-wheel drive. So that's probably what you need to decide. If you were buying a better performance car, maybe the Skoda is the one. But if you want all-wheel drive in a Subaru wagon, then at least the WRX TS Sportwagon has plenty to offer. Maybe not as much to offer as we'd like, but still plenty to offer. So with such a broad spread of talent in the 2022 WRX range, where does that leave the TS Sportwagon? If you're looking at the wagon, I think you absolutely should go to this model here. In terms of a recommended list price, it's only $8,000 more expensive than the base model. It brings a lot more equipment, and in particular, over the GT we tested some weeks ago, $2,500 more than that brings still heaps more in this. I think it starts with the adaptive dampers, which are just as comfortable as the non-adaptive dampers, which only have one setting, but also manage to be better controlled and then have all of those other layers on top of that. Plus you have the ultra suede seats, you have a sunroof. There's just a level of premiumness and detail finesse that this vehicle offers here. That said, if you're buying a WRX of any body style and you really want the best driver's car, you need to buy the sedan. At the end of the day, even though it has a WRX badge right there above TS on the tailgate, electric tailgate, this car is a bit of a Levorg. It drives like you would imagine the Levorg tune of WRX would, meaning it just doesn't have that point and that grip. But I reckon if you replace those alloys, which personally I think would look a lot better if they were another design and if they had a higher quality tyre on them, then this could be a really good driver's wagon. One that's the same price as something like a Skoda Octavia RS, which is arguably more of a driver's car than this Subaru, but doesn't have all-wheel drive. And this is a Subaru at the end of the day, and people love this brand and know what it has to offer for them. So yeah, it's not everything it could be, but it's still a really likable thing. If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video, hit the notification bell and tell us what you think about the Subaru WRX TS Sportwagon with adaptive dampers or about chasing cars. Thanks for watching.